All season and through the playoffs, these stripes were steeped in one label: underdog. As a matter of fact, being the long shot is such a part of this Bengals team that star quarterback Joe Burrow himself had to cool down the rhetoric. There's no question, Burrow's Bengals have earned huge respect this year. But on the eve of the big showdown in LA, Cincinnati's long shot narrative may be getting louder than ever, with headline after headline stating this year's Bengals are the biggest underdogs ever to make it to the big show. To find out how unlikely this season has been for Cincinnati, we have to rewind all the way back to the preseason and Bengals training camp last year. Back then, Zach Taylor had racked up just 6 wins in his first 2 seasons as the Bengals head coach. And more importantly, Joe Burrow had no big nicknames, just big questions after returning from a torn ACL that sidelined him his rookie year. Not exactly a great setup for a championship run when betting began in preseason. According to Pro Football Reference, odds makers back then gave the Houston Texans the worst odds of making it to the Super Bowl, 300 to 1. But the Bengals weren't far behind, tying the Jets with the second worst odds, 150 to 1, at winning the Super Bowl before the season began. So where does that 150 to 1 chance place Cincinnati when it comes to biggest underdogs of all time? According to the Sporting News, since 1977, only a dozen teams with 50 to 1 or longer odds in preseason actually made it to the Super Bowl. That list includes the 1981 Bengals, which had 60 to 1 odds, the 1994 Chargers at a 75 to 1 chance, and the 2016 Falcons at 80 to 1. No other team has had longer odds and made it to the Super Bowl than this year's Bengals. But ironically, one other team does tie the Bengals with those long shot odds. Let's go! The 1999 Rams. Based back then in St. Louis, the Rams too faced the exact same odds, 150 to 1. And led by Kurt Warner, the Rams beat those big odds and won Super Bowl 34 in 2000. Fast forward 22 years, and Burrow's Bengals hope to rip an underdog page right out from under the Rams, the same franchise, now based in LA, that they'll face in Super Bowl 56. So if you said the Bengals are the biggest underdogs ever to make it to the Super Bowl, you're right. But the orange and black are tied in that top spot for long shots with the team in blue and gold. The same team that Cincinnati will now face in one of the biggest spectacles in sports. Who Dey? I'm Duane Pullman. For Heather Conrad, crossing the street is traumatic.
I have depression, anxiety, PTSD, things that come along with trauma.
Especially when she crosses here at the intersection of Walnut and 4th Streets in downtown Cincinnati. That's because of what happened at this spot nearly 4 years ago.
It's not every day that somebody gets hit by a bus.
That's Heather, captured by a security camera around 8:30 a.m. on May 15th, 2018. She was on her way to work, entering that crosswalk. The pedestrian signal, that box we all should look at before we cross, had just put this hand up, but the clock was still counting down, and Heather, like many of us, thought that meant she still had time to cross the street.
It's been going on now for years.
This video from inside that bus, operated by the Transit Authority of Northern Kentucky, or TANK, reveals the driver talking to a rider and making that turn from 4th onto Walnut.
Oh my God! Oh my God! Oh my God!
That's when Heather was knocked down by the left corner of the bus and run over.
Oh my God! Oh my God! Oh no!
I was almost to the other side, and I was in mid-stride, and the bus clipped my leg and pulled me under.
Dragged 23 feet, Heather suffered life-threatening injuries, including a concussion, broken ribs, a punctured lung, and worst of all, her leg was split and peeled to the bone.
You're lucky to be alive.
I've been told that.
Oh my God.
You can see people in shock rushing to help her. So Heather was the victim, right? After being struck by the bus, Heather was stuck with hundreds of thousands of dollars in medical bills, including 5 surgeries on her leg.
At one point, they told me I might lose my leg.
What was that like?
Scary.
Attorney Charlie Ritgers and his team filed this lawsuit for Heather against Tank and that driver. Ritgers thought it was a legal slam dunk. It wasn't. We all think pedestrians have the right of way. Is that true?
Not necessarily.
It turns out Ohio has a law that doesn't even recognize that countdown clock that many of us, like Heather, use as a cue that we still have time to cross the street. ORC 4511.14 states only that a flashing upraised hand signal indication, which symbolizes don't walk, means that a pedestrian shall not start to cross the roadway. Even this accomplished lawyer was stunned by a law he admits he never knew was on the books.
I never read it, nor is the public aware of it. That's the sad part.
And when the security camera footage was reviewed, it revealed Heather stepped into the crosswalk just after that hand came up. Ritgers had to pivot and focus on the driver's distraction. Heather got a settlement, but Ritgers says he could have received more had it not been for Ohio's crosswalk law. You had to cut your expectations of payout.
That's correct. Exactly.
And that did it because of this law.
Right.
Do you feel cheated by a law?
I do. This could happen to anyone.
As hard as it is to believe, Heather was partly at fault for being hit by a bus, all because of a confusing Ohio law that Heather and her attorney agree
It's just a badly drafted statute.
is just plain wrong.
I think the law needs to change.
And my story is far from over. I'm talking to a state senator to see if that law can be fixed to make it safer for pedestrians all across Ohio, because that would make this right. I'm Duane Pullman. Across the USA, flags still wave. Politicians continue to campaign, vying for votes that are still being cast. But after a pandemic, protests that turned into riots, and political polarization that saw a siege on the U.S. Capitol, things just don't feel the same for many of us. Polls reflect that mood in America. A survey in the spring of 2021 by the Pew Research Center found 58% dissatisfied with the way democracy is working in America. In a Yahoo News YouGov poll released in June, 49% believe America will cease to be a democracy in the future. And a Quinnipiac University poll in August found 67% think democracy in America is in danger of collapse. Some say it already has, claiming on social media that America is no longer a democracy at all. In 1988, President Ronald Reagan famously described America.
This shining city on a hill.
He never would have imagined that the famous hill in our shining city would look like this. But it did, and America is facing a new reality about the democracy we once took for granted. There's no question our political turmoil has tarnished America's image as the beacon of democracy. The European think tank International IDEA published a Global State of Democracy report in 2021 and found America is experiencing democratic backsliding. The Economist Intelligence Unit, or EIU, a leader in tracking democracies around the world, now lists the United States of America as a flawed democracy, ranking the USA 26th in its democracy index, just behind Chile and just ahead of Estonia. It's a sobering reality check on the eve of our midterm elections. But backsliding and flawed determinations of democracy aren't necessarily omens of fate. After all, America survived the tumultuous 60s, filled with violent protests, political upheaval, and assassinations. A century before that, we survived a bloody civil war and the assassination of one of our greatest presidents. So, as we try to make it through our own turbulent times, you might want to listen to the words of Robert Kennedy Jr., who said, "Democracy is messy, and it's hard. It's never easy." And as you vote, keep in mind the words of Abraham Lincoln, who reminded us a long time ago, the ballot is stronger than the bullet. If you think democracy is dead in America, you're wrong, because this is still your country, and your vote still counts. I'm Duane Pullman.